Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Sunday School Hype video for the week of November 17th. As you can see, I've turned things around here, and Pastor Ben rebuked me for having ugly blinds and ceiling tiles in the background of my video, so I thought that I would put these beautiful, wonderful books here so you can have a little bit more pleasure in your background viewing as I give you this week's information. So just a couple things. I would encourage you to go back and watch the previous two videos if you haven't. So I've covered the Sunday School lesson from the Gospel Project curriculum in those videos, but I've also made important announcements and then also walked through deacon elections, what it means to be a deacon, and what we should be praying for and voting for a deacon, among other things. So I would encourage you to go back and watch those videos. You can see those here on the YouTube channel. So just a couple things as we begin this week's video. First, deacon elections are this Sunday. So I would encourage you, if you were not planning on being here, if you can change your schedule and be here to vote on deacons. Be praying about who you're going to be voting for, in line with 1 Timothy 3 and our bylaws. Also, Operation Christmas Child Shoeboxes are due this Sunday, and there's a lot that have not been taken, and there's a lot that have been taken that haven't been turned in. So I want to encourage you to turn those in so that we can reach our goal in that ministry. Also, this Sunday is Orphan Sunday, so I would encourage you to be here and think through what it means for us to have been lost, orphaned, and then adopted into Christ, God's family through Christ. And then we're, as Christians, called to then play that out in a tangible way to picture the gospel through how we care for orphans, and either through caring and adopting orphans ourselves, or through funding and helping those who desire to do so, or praying for orphans. Also, we have a new staff member. So Frank Kraft began this week as our media director. So he and his wife Hannah are moving from the Lafayette area, where he was a bivocational pastor there. So make him feel welcome, and we're so excited. This is a great need we've had in a long time. So many things in terms of media that need to be done throughout the week, that we've needed a full-time person for, and so the workload had just gotten too big, and this is a huge need, and we're thankful to have Frank here to help us with a lot of those things. Also, if you're in the Gospel Project curriculum, remember that at the end of every lesson, there's a mission call for you to apply the lesson and be on mission for Christ throughout the week, and think through how you're going to do that. And then there's also daily study. So if you don't have a daily devotional, daily means of studying God's Word, you can use this as a guide. And then remember that the reasons that we moved, one of the main reasons we moved to this curriculum is that your children are on the same lesson. So teachers, if you've missed some weeks in the Gospel Project curriculum, you started late because you're trying to finish up another study, just skip ahead. Like, don't feel like you have to cover everything. I want you on the same lesson your kids are on that week. So if you need to skip some weeks in order to do that, do that. That's one of the main reasons we are doing this, so that you can be in uniform with your children. So that being said, last week I attached a PDF of the children's curriculum. The Gospel Project can be dense. I for sure can be dense at times, and so I want to help simplify things. So last week I attached children's curriculum in a PDF. This week I'm doing that as well. I would encourage you to email this video to your class and email that PDF to your class so that they can use that as they walk through that with their children. And so that's, I'm going to try to keep it much shorter this week. So that's my main announcements and introductory stuff. So I want to move now into the lesson. And so where we are is in 2 Chronicles 36. So remember, in the Gospel Project, we're not going verse by verse through the Old Testament. We're we're going kind of event by event, big picture, seeing how the Old Testament outline points to Jesus Christ and his coming and the need for a new covenant. And so what we've seen is God creating the world, man falling into sin, God promising to send a Savior through Genesis 3:15, him picking that up with a family, and Abraham saying it's going to be through that family, through that he would bless all the nations of the earth. That family went to Egypt, went and was in slavery for a couple hundred years, and then he, by his grace, saved them out, established them as his people by his grace and his salvation, and then made a covenant with them at Mount Sinai and said, now that I've saved you by my grace, you're my people, this is how you're going to live. Gave them the moral law, the Ten Commandments, gave them the ceremonial law of the temple and the priesthood and the sacrifices, and then gave them the civil law of what Israel's government should look like and how it should be structured from a legal standpoint. And so that's how they were supposed to live in the Old Testament. And then he would also give them a land which they were supposed to play those things out in, and then he would establish his temple in the land, and he would dwell with them there. And so it was hard because they kept turning away from God, and he had to keep bringing them back and turning away and bringing them back. But they finally got into the Promised Land, and then we've seen how that played out once they got into the Promised Land, with good kings and bad kings, but many times they were turning away from God, and God had to keep bringing them back, even when they were in the land. And he had promised them, when you read, and we're gonna look at this today, when you read the book of Exodus, when God was establishing his covenant before they went into the land, he promised them that if they disobeyed and broke his covenant, that he would take the land away from them. And in the same way, in Leviticus 26, when he was giving them the ceremonial law of the temple and the sacrifices, he also told them that if they broke, if they continued to disobey him, then he would destroy the temple and take away the land. And so where we are in our big picture of the Old Testament this week is in 2 Chronicles 36, which is really the end of the Old Testament. Now, I know it's not the end of our Old Testament, because our Old Testament ends with the prophets, the last being Malachi. But when you look at the story of the Old Testament, it really goes Genesis through 2 Chronicles, because when you look back at how the Jewish people organized the Old Testament, before, they actually had 2 Chronicles, which was just one book. It was Chronicles. We've separated into two as the last book because it was the last of the story, if you will, that looked forward to the new covenant. And so the story kind of ends here. Now you have Ezra and Nehemiah, which gives the details of them coming back into the Promised Land, where you just get the very general couple statements of that at the end of 2 Chronicles. And so it doesn't give you all the end of the details of the story, like Ezra and Nehemiah tell you of when the people came back from exile and how they established the land there and all that. But it gives you the general outline of Babylon came and destroyed the temple and the land, and then there was a return, would be a return. So we're in 2 Chronicles, and in chapter 36, where we are, the last king is reigning, Zedekiah. So remember Saul, David, Solomon, those were the first three kings, and then the kingdom split in two, and you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. You had kings in both. The kings in the northern kingdom kept turning the people away from God, and God sent Assyria to take them out of their part of the land into exile. But the southern kingdom remained, Judah, but their kings they had some better kings, Hezekiah, Josiah, but they had a lot of bad kings just like the north, and eventually that caught up with them as well, and God sent Babylon to come take them out of their land and destroy the temple. And the last king before that happened, when that happened, was Zedekiah. And so that's what we read about today in our lesson in the Gospel Project. And so we begin the lesson by thinking about why do bad things happen? So this is the worst event in the history of the nation of Israel. An outside people. We looked at Habakkuk last week. Habakkuk was complaining about how God had told him he was going to send Babylon. He was complaining because they were even worse than Israel. He's like, God, how could you judge your people with a nation that's even worse than Israel? And God said, don't worry, I'm going to judge them too. You might not understand everything. Your job is to trust me, not come up with your own idea of justice, but trust me in my plan and what I'm going to do. But we did see that Babylon was bad and that God was going to use them to judge Israel. And this was a bad thing. And so when we think from a Christian worldview, why do bad things happen? You hear that a lot, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, when you think about that question, there's a couple of different ways of looking at the answer. Number one, bad things don't happen to good people because no one is good. Romans 3, quoting Psalms, says that no one is good, no, not one. And that doesn't mean that we don't have any good in us. It just means that when you look at the standard of God's goodness and compare us to that, no one is good. So bad things don't happen to good people. Bad things happen to sinners. And sinners don't deserve anything. We don't deserve the clothes we have, the food we have, the houses we have, the breath that we have. The only thing we deserve is hell as sinners. And so because of that, bad things don't happen to good people. Bad things happen to sinners. And bad things happen to different people in different degrees, for sure. And Job tells us, though, that we don't understand all the answers to why some things happen to some people and some things happen to others. We know that we're all sinners and none of us deserve the good things. But we don't understand why some people have it better than others and some don't. God has a plan for directing all that, and our job is to trust Him and not question Him. And not that we can't ever go to Him and ask Him why and cry out to Him in pain and agony and have a relationship with Him. Certainly we see that in the Psalms, and that's not what I mean by trusting Him and not questioning Him. But even in the midst of all that pain and struggle, and even crying out to Him and even asking Him why He's doing the things He's doing, nothing's wrong with that. But even in the midst of that, He's not going to ultimately give us an answer of why. Job ends the book, and God never says why He did it, other than He is God and He is to be trusted, and He's going to bring about good in the end for those that love Him, and as Romans 8:28 says, are called according to His purpose. And so but we need to think about bad things happening in three categories. Number one, bad things can happen because of my sin. So direct effect. I sin, I do something wrong, therefore, consequence, something bad happens. So that's one legitimate way bad things can happen in this world. Second way that bad things can happen is that others sinning is me. So the bad thing that I'm experiencing, I didn't necessarily cause. Someone else sin caused it in my life, and therefore I experience it. So someone did me wrong. The third way something bad can happen is just the fact that we live in a broken, cursed world. Some people came to Jesus and asked Him why a tower fell on some people and killed them. His disciples came to Jesus and asked Him why a man was born blind. Was it because of his sin or his parents' sin? And Jesus said, neither. It was so that God's glory might be shown in his life. So Jesus saying it wasn't a direct effect of anyone's sin. It was because he was born in a sinful, fallen world, and some people are just born blind. But Jesus was going to heal that blind man and display God's glory in his life. And God calls everyone, regardless of the circumstance they have, whether they can walk or not, whether they can see or not, and that might have happened not because of their own doing, but just because they were born in a cursed world. He calls everybody to trust in Him the same in the gospel of Jesus Christ, so that God's glory might be shown in their life, just like in that blind man. And so we see, I'll show it up, put it up here. Why do bad things happen? Well, they can happen because of my sin. They can happen because of other sin against me, or bad things can happen just because we're born into a broken world. So my sin doesn't cause hurricanes and tornadoes, necessarily. In a way it does, because everyone's sin works towards the curse and brokenness of the world. But my personal sin, there's not a direct correlation between my personal sin and a tornado or a hurricane happening. That's the effect of a fallen world that we're all a part of, right? And so, but when it comes to Israel in the Old Testament, Babylon came and judged them because of their sin. It wasn't because of other people's sins. It wasn't because of the fallenness of the world. It was because of their sin. They sinned, thus they got judged. And so I'm going to walk through the lesson here. It says, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet. So this was during Jeremiah's time, who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. He rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon. He stiffened his neck, hardened his heart, and all the officers of the priests and people, so even the priests of the temple and the people, likewise became unfaithful because of his leadership, following all the abominations of the nations, which is following after their idols, false gods. And they polluted the house of the Lord, which is the temple that the God had made holy. So Zedekiah was prideful. We see that his sin came because of pride and thinking that he knew better than God. He didn't want to submit to the authority of God. He didn't want to steward his rule over God's people well and help them grow in righteousness. Rather, he led them away, thinking that he knew best in his pride. And so that's some people have said that the foundation of all sin is pride. Lack of bowing the knee of the authority of God and being prideful and seems to be Satan's first sin, and that can be our first sin, our foundational sin. So that can result in many ways in your life. In your marriage, you can be so prideful that you do not listen to your spouse,